Remember Season of Mastery? It should be coming to a close fairly soon, you know. Releasing 16th of November 2021, Season of Mastery, or SOM, was a cluster of fresh Classic realms. It was Blizzard having a go at redoing Classic with alterations based upon community feedback, as well as, well, just trying to spice things up and offer a bit of a different experience. And with the Nax 40 releasing back at the end of July and a roughly 11 to 13 month estimated duration, the project at this point is all but complete. So how did it go? What went well? What was well received? Did anything go terribly wrong? And the biggest question of all, is Blizzard going to be doing something like this again? Before we go on though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Naraka Blade Points, who are currently offering a huge 50% discount on Xbox or free with Xbox Games Pass. What is Naraka Blade Point though? Imagine a battle royale, but instead of it being building or shooting, it's combined a mix of melee weapons and hero skills to create a unique take on the genre, with less need for aiming and more prediction-based skills. Naraka Blade Point is fast-paced, and a key part of your mobility is your grappling hook that can be used to access all kinds of areas on the map, or even as a tool to knock down enemies. Each hero has unique skills that set it apart from others. Takaji's Earthshaker is a huge spinning AoE that lands in a massive damaging attack. New weapons are also added to keep the game fresh, such as the dual blades, which can fire off many quick attacks in short succession. Customize your character in more or less any way you want, and I really mean that. If you can think of it, you can probably try to make it in Naraka Blade Point. You can even upload your own image and the game will recreate you. Click the link in the description right now to try Naraka Blade Point and you'll get a 50% discount on Xbox. Many thanks to Naraka Blade Point for the sponsor today. Let's talk WoW. Quick mention that transfers from seasonal servers to live ones or error are now available. And importantly, your chosen transfer is one way, irreversible and final. If you do not transfer your character off, they are going to be deleted eventually. We don't know what date seasonal servers are formally closing yet, but you should transfer your characters sooner rather than later. So, Season of Mastery, the vanilla fresh servers. The Burning Crusade had come out a few months prior and Blizzard decided now was the time to roll out these servers and see if people were truly interested enough in Classic to do it all again. This time with a lot less of a no changes attitude. And when did Season of Mastery start, you ask? Right in the middle of Phase 2 of TBC, during the most challenging raiding patch that Classic had ever seen. That was pre-nerf SSC and Tempest Keep, which at the time were literally required to do if you wanted to see Illidan on the top of the Black Temple because achievements were still in the game. This was not ideal timing, not only due to how hype the current TBC content was, but also because it felt like Classic was trying to compete with your attention against the Burning Crusade. It really didn't help how popular these realms would be. Speaking of the realms, there were, well, quite a few of them. Over on European English-speaking realms, for example, we had 2 PvE servers and 3 PvP servers for Season of Mastery. On live Wrath of the Lich King Classic right now, there are 13 realms total. That's including the 3 fresh realms which launched with Wrath. But even if we were to take away those fresh realms, did Season of Mastery ever merit having half as many realms as the live game does? I'm pretty sure the answer to that at every single point in time has been no, absolutely nowhere near. It created an environment where players made their best attempts in advance to mark out a server as this will be the one where everybody plays. And that worked, by the way. On Europe it was Dreadnought, which is of course the one named after Warrior Tier, and over on NA it was Jom Gabar, which is a very nice melee trinket. I'm seeing a pattern here. Just name a realm after something to do with warriors and everyone will go play there. Interesting. As for the other realms, I can see there being an argument for having one PvE server, just like the Wrath Fresh realms did. Apart from that though, there were a lot of players who frankly just rolled on a realm which was destined to die off in population pretty fast. So whether it was massively overestimating the number of players who would be interested in seasonal servers or just testing out how people reacted to the choice, there were too many realms for the launch of SOM. There were also a bunch of changes to the content pacing of the game, with Blizzard opting to bring forwards loads of stuff which would usually have come much later, including PvP gear being available from launch. Don't worry, we're going to be talking talking more about PvP later. Diamol being opened straight away, when in Classic it was a few months after launch. The tier 0.5 quest lines in Classic, these were as late as AQ40, and the level 50 Sunken Temple class quest, which awarded various decent quality blue items, including Diamond Flask, which no longer snapshotted healing anymore. That finally got nerfed. Overall, I liked having the extra choice in where to get gear from, but oftentimes these updated sources kind of just replace the old ones. Itemization in Diamol is notably better than a lot of the stuff that came before it. Tier 0.5 is catch-up gear for the guy who can't make raids but wants to progress their characters, and the PvP items were well out of whack power-wise for how early they could be acquired. You were more or less forced to rank if you did want to set up your character well. I mean, yes, this was the case in Classic 2, but the rank gear being available from the start made it so much better than anything else, including raiding gear, by the way. It was so much better it felt like a waste of time doing the whole gearing ladder when you could just be running down Alterac Valley for 12 hours a day and eventually collecting items which were best in slot for months. And people will do whatever makes the most sense to gear their character, even if it's not fun. That's a developer game design issue to stop that scenario from arising, not a player one to do something which is less efficient for them. That's not to say there weren't plenty of decisions made which undoubtedly went a long way to help Season of Mastery and its player base. The game was absolutely packed with quality of life features. There was an XP buff to grant 40% bonus XP from all activities the moment the servers launched, in addition to a boost of XP from completing elite quests. This was later ramped up to 100% bonus XP by the time Blackwing Lair had launched. Usually myself, I'm a bit of a questing enjoyer and don't mind a slower pace on leveling, but the server, by its nature, is seasonal. You need some kind of extra incentive to get people through the content a little bit faster, and I think that's fine. The cost of mounts were reduced because if you're hitting level 40 much faster than intended, your pockets are going to be pretty empty. This ensured you got your wolf, horse, mechanistrider, or whatever else the moment you were able to. Professions underwent significant changes to increase the availability of materials and speed up the rate at which items were crafted. On launch, you could receive items like elemental earth or fire from mining thorium. All endgame zones had a greater number of mining and herbing nodes. Black Lotus, in addition to their own spawns, could now be obtained as rare drops from all high-level herbs, similar to how Fel and Frost Lotus work in TBC and Wrath. Alongside Blackwing Lair releasing, further updates were made to alchemy so that those with the highest level of the profession could proc bonus crafts, similar to what those with master into potions, flasks, or transmutations could do in TBC. And in the AQ40 patch, this extra procs idea was extended to more cooldown-based items such as Arcanite bars or cured rugged hides. It was in Season of Mastery that Blizzard really took a shot at cracking down on boosting, something which players had piloted into a fine art in Classic. The calculation of damage caused and XP gained was changed so that mob tagging was no longer effective. This was when a low-level player hit a mob once to gain a tag, and then a higher-level player would finish it off in one hit. You repeat this many times over, and it used to be good experience per hour. A ton of changes were made to elite mobs in dungeons, including them gaining immunity to snaring effects after 30 seconds, roots 30 seconds later, and a further 30 seconds later a 50% movement speed buff. This made the boosting methods at the time more or less all completely invalid. This affected dungeons such as Zul'Farrak, Maradon, and Strat. In time, and even during Wrath, there are still ways to boost, but it's nowhere near the industrial scale non-stop mage spam in every chat channel that it used to be in Classic. And with tons of bonus XP from questing, it wasn't going to take you anywhere near as long to get to 60, even just through normal play. There was also an Lfg tool added into Season of Mastery 2, and now that I go back and look at it, it does appear to be a bit of a framework for what we've ended up getting when it comes to Wrath. All these for me were positive changes from the original game, which made sense when the server was destined to be seasonal. Another addition which was totally new and unexpected was the Soul of Iron buff. During Classic, a group of players had already begun to forge out a new way of playing the game, as opposed to the standard hit level cap and then go PvP or PvE. It was all about undergoing the hardcore challenge, with varying levels of self-assigned difficulty, no grouping, no trading, and perhaps most challenging of all, no dying, all the way from level 1 to 60. And this community had been gaining traction and interest throughout Classic. Enter Season of Mastery, and Blizzard added NPCs to Ironforge and Undercity, which allowed the player to toggle on World of Warcraft's first look at a hardcore mode. This was simply a buff that showed the player had never died. There were no real efficient official rules to this challenge. It was left entirely in the community's hands to handle from then on out. There was also the Road to Ragnaros challenge pushed by the hardcore community, where they aimed to defeat Ragnaros with a full raid of players who had never known defeat, and they were successful in doing that, by the way. There were additional tabards for completing raids without dying, as well as a feat of strength achievement which you can get on the RAF servers for hitting 60 on Season of Mastery without ever dying. Soon enough you'll see people start to ask, how did you get that tabard when the seasonal players begin to transfer to RAF? It was a fun challenge, a nod to the community, and up to Ragnaros being defeated, it was the center of hype surrounding these new servers, more so than any other change that had been made. People were invested in the drama and the stories created at the time. Who is already level 60? How did they do it? Who was the first one? Has anyone died at level 60? What happened? Are they really going to be able to kill Ragnaros? And so on. And at the time when seasonal servers were launching, people were asking for a hardcore specific server to mitigate people's efforts to grief, which were quite plentiful, by the way. Who knows, second time around, maybe there's enough interest. More on that later. Right then, on to the big one, raiding. This was the big focus of Season of Mastery. It was about mastering this revamped and buffed content. First up, buff and debuff limits have been removed from the game. No worrying about those anymore. Very nice. World buffs were no longer a part of raiding content. This had been a massive thorn in the side for players during Classic. You still needed your consumables, but they were a lot easier to get thanks to the profession changes we have already talked about. Also, and very importantly, this meant Blizzard had a realistic chance to tune the content around how powerful players were expected to be without those buffs. Also, come Blackwing Lure, all bosses dropped an extra piece of loot to help players gear up a little bit easier during this expedited timeline. And loads of encounters during every single raid saw changes. Bosses and Molten Core saw mechanics happen more often. Blackwing Lure had entirely new mechanics on several fights, such as Chromagus, where you had to hide behind an ice block. Zul'Gurub had additional ways to acquire mounts added to it and encourage you to take on a more challenging variation of Hakkar, leaving some of the priests alive. AQ40 had a dynamic difficulty where you could choose the level of challenge you wanted, and throughout encounters, various tentacles or even a vision of Cthulhu himself would appear in fights. Naxxramas had a host of new spells and items to give players new and creative ways to take on encounters. There were a ton of changes to each raid, more than I can realistically go over here, and from all the people I've talked to who have done a lot of raiding in Season of Mastery, they all more or less say the same thing. It's actually pretty cool, and it's a shame that more people didn't stick through it and actually give it a chance. I kind of wish I did sometimes personally, but the thing is, even with the changes made, Classic raiding is still pretty time consuming. Even with easier to get consumables, harder content is going to mean you go through them a lot faster. And for me personally, though raiding had changed and the revamped encounters would have been great to see more of, what didn't change was the power ranking of how classes played during raids. Blizzard had voiced at the start of Season of Mastery they hope things such as the debuff limit removal and raid alterations opened up the opportunity for players to bring a wider variety of classes and specs during the raiding content. It did not. Here's a 2-week snapshot of passes from actual Naxx back in Classic compared to the seasonal version. It turns out the classes at the top remain there with or without world buffs. Numbers wise, everyone is still going for those well-known meta picks. For example, the Classic snapshot here saw 111,000 warrior passes compared to less than 1,000 shaman DPS across both specs, about 1,200 druids, and less than 1k rep pallers. Season of Mastery saw just under 8,000 warrior passes and under 100 ret, shaman, and druid DPSs respectively. No one is playing the hybrids in raiding content. What this season did failed to change that in any way at all. I think a lot of us predicted that harder content cements the meta before Season of Mastery even launched, and that is very much proven to be the case now. Also, most of the classes are still just one button. I don't know about you, but after having gone through Classic and TBC and now seen how classes evolve in Wrath, going back to playing a one-button game is a really hard sell for me right about now. On top of class balance, the faction balance also did what was very predictable. Alliance proved throughout Classic that from a performance point of view, more often than not, Paladin is gonna do better than Shaman. Also, more PvPers tended to play Horde for the racials, and if you care more about PvE, you actually still do want to PvP a lot for the ranking gear, and you're more likely to get instant queues for Battlegrounds, meaning better honor per hour if on Alliance. Throughout Seasonal Mastery, Alliance was quite consistently about 2/3 of the total player base, according to publicly available sources. Speaking of PvP though, let's give that a quick mention. So we've touched on the gear already. It was too good to be available from day one, or at least the rank 12 and above epic gear was absolutely too good. The rank 10 gear was still very powerful, however, maybe even that should have been considered a bit too good for day one. There was another big change though, which was made to ranking. So what they did in short was doubled ranking point gains. This meant the grind to high ranks was cut in half, taking it from a matter of months to weeks. What this didn't change was the requirement to play for many hours a day when on the grind, the need to pull boost to ensure more high-end spots became available, or the fact that you aren't fighting against the opposite faction when you're ranking, you're fighting among your own faction to place as high as possible. At one point in Seasonal Mastery before it launched, it looked as though they were considering halving rank decay instead of doubling RP. This would have led to a much more casual-friendly experience, as you aren't fighting against your ranking point decay nearly as hard each week. Now, personally, I've never been a fan of the ranking system. I don't know how this system made it into the first seasonal server after having seen how it went in Classic. I guess it is a core feature, which is why it's hanging on, but from a game design perspective, you know players literally have to play an insane amount over a few weeks if they want the top rewards. No other area of the game forces you to do this apart from ranking. It's kind of complicated though, because you do want to gatekeep the gear rewards pretty hard due to how much better they are than anything else. If there's a season or two, I'm hoping to see a bit more work put into the ranking system and the gear rewards. Anyways, let's do a recap. Blizzard in an interview recently said they'd seen Season of Mastery as a success, and I actually tend to agree. It's definitely a smaller number of people actually wanting to go back when given the choice, but there's clearly a demand for it. A lot of people at least gave it a go, and I think that that is important. The website WoW Classic Pop shows a total number of 46,000 players have been seen on largest US server John Gabar over its life, and just over 13,000 of those were at some point level 60. We've seen some of the successes of Season of Mastery be ported over to the main game, such as the blueprints for changing boosting, for example. And from publicly visible sources on ironforge.pro, there was a peak raiding population of around 11,000 players over the space of a week. And from Blizzard's point of view, I'd imagine it takes a smaller team only a bit of their time to dedicate to Season of Mastery. They have already rebuilt Classic on the modern infrastructure. Things such as altering numbers for ranking point gains, releasing content earlier or later, things of that nature all seem like fairly quick fixes. And I would expect Season of Mastery had a ton of value from an informational point of view. Instead of just hearing what people are saying, what will they do when they are really given a choice? What is just a vocal minority shouting for something, and what do people actually want to engage with? All in all, I do expect there to be another seasonal server for Classic, not for the Burning Crusade. I think Blizzard have already outlined there doesn't appear to be enough interest for that. For Wrath, quite possibly, but it's too far away to say at this point. For Classic though, it could go one of two ways. Clearly there are some mega Classic fans out there who would play any fresh that they are given by Blizzard. A kind of player who would enjoy more or less a no changes 2019 Classic release all over again, with only the minor quality of life or bug fixes which were made over Classic's original duration, and possibly to have the Chronoboon in from day one just to make world buffs a little less painful. I'm pretty confident that there are people out there who just want to play Classic as it was without all of these different changes. Fan servers have shown time and time again that this demographic exists. Option 2 is we go deeper down the seasonal rabbit hole. We've done raid changes. Surely the next step is class changes, gear rebalancing, stat allocation, and so on. Do they make hit and crit from percentage into ratings to make them more easy to balance? Will all specializations for each class get a tier set, and tier now perhaps drops as tokens? How about new craftable gear from tailoring, leatherworking, and blacksmith, maybe other professions, which aims to help out hybrid DPS a little? Maybe instead Blizzard goes full in on the hardcore community's initial success, giving an actual hardcore server. Maybe you even lose items or experience on death, a version of World of Warcraft which adds a ton of risk to the open world. Well, why not all of these? Why not just release the lot and let people make a choice? I think it would be a good idea to only do one thing at once. I really don't believe the seasonal server does much to fragment the player base based from the main game, and people are always going to be playing whatever the main game is. But I think for seasonal servers, it's in its best interest not to offer too many choices. Just do one thing at once, try and do it well, make sure that everybody who wants that thing is playing that thing, and maybe something different can happen during the next seasonal server. Don't overload them. The same as releasing with too many realms, it spreads the interest too thin. For me, and this kind of goes for all variations of if and when they do a next season, I'd level casually because I enjoy leveling, I like the world of vanilla, and that's always been a very fun thing for me to do. Playing a 10 game is really very dependent on what's going on in Wrath, assuming it would launch in Wrath of course. If they do anything around the time when Ulduar is releasing, for example, that's not going to be any good for me. It also depends how much time investment is really needed to get into it. Playing one version of World of Warcraft already takes a while, and if I'm going to be raiding, I'd rather have a set guild which I play with. I'm not interested in pugging. For Seasonal Mastery, there were actually a lot of positives and definitely some negatives. That's what happens when things change, and I can tell you after having played World of Warcraft since, well, actual vanilla, and now having played Classic for a few years, people forget how often things would break or be bugged back in the original expansions. They weren't quite all so smooth sailing. I think it's pretty easy to scapegoat any single decision you didn't like about Seasonal Mastery as to the reason why it quote-unquote failed, but in the end, these seasonal servers are just always going to have a smaller niche community, more or less whatever Blizzard end up doing, which is why I personally don't mind them going absolutely crazy with changes if they are so inclined. Hopefully when Blizzard announce the transfers off Seasonal Mastery and its ending date, they do some kind of closing post on how things went and ideas they may have for the future. That would be really great to hear about. I guess let's wait and see if there's a season 2 and what they choose to do with it. Let me know what you'd like to see for season 2, and if you gave season 1 a go, how did it go for you? Were you happy with it? Did you not like it? How long did you play? All that good stuff. That's everything for today though guys. Thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.